Imagine, just for a second, waking up tomorrow morning.
Okay.
You stretch your arms, you look around your room, and you realize that the you who just woke up doesn't actually exist.
Oh, wow.
Right, not as a separate, distinct thing anyway. Like, what if your entire sense of individuality, your memories, your personality quirks, all your anxieties, what if all of that is fundamentally just a temporary illusion?
That is quite a thought experiment to start the day with.
It really is. I mean, we tend to think of ourselves as these isolated subjects, right? Just moving through this vast, objective universe. But the deeper you push into the actual architecture of reality, the more those boundaries just completely begin to dissolve.
They do. They really do.
We might just be looking at a highly detailed, incredibly convincing dream that the universe itself happens to be having. And that is exactly what we're getting into today.
It induces a kind of, well, ontological vertigo, I'd call it.
Ontological vertigo. I like that.
Yeah, because the conditioning to experience ourselves as the main character, a distinct locus of consciousness, looking out through the windows of our eyes at a world that is fundamentally other, that is so deeply wired into our neurology and our language, too.
Like our whole grammar is built on subjects and objects. I push the ball. The ball is separate from me.
Exactly. To even entertain the idea that the boundary between you and the outside world is a hallucination, it completely dismantles how we orient ourselves. I mean, we rely on that subject-object split just to navigate the grocery store.
Let alone build a coherent worldview. Yeah. It's the ultimate paradigm shift. And usually when you start floating concepts about like the self being an illusion or the universe being a single dreaming mind, people assume you've wandered into a late-night dorm room philosophy session.
Or some esoteric mystical retreat, right?
Yeah, exactly. But today, in this deep dive, we are grounding this in the most rigorous intellectual frameworks available to us. We are tracing a massive historical through line here.
We really are. The stack of sources for today is just phenomenal.
It is. We're going to look at the founders of quantum mechanics and relativity, so the giants of physics from the last century. And we'll cross-reference their findings with the greatest philosophers and psychologists in history. And then we'll tie it all together with the deeply experiential accounts of classical mystics and a modern explorer of consciousness named Joe Bandra.
It's a huge mission.
It is. Our goal is to map how human understanding has been forced to shift from viewing the universe as a giant predictable machine to seeing it as a unified field of information.
And crucially, we're going to tackle the incredibly radical claim that ultimate reality can't simply be calculated on a blackboard.
Right.
It has to be experienced directly. By the end of this hour, you are going to look at the physical world and yourself in a completely different way.
So to understand this massive transition from the universe as a machine to the universe as this deeply interconnected web of information, we really have to understand what science accidentally shattered.
Yes, we have to look at what they were rebelling against.
Right. So we start with the architecture of the classical machine, which was largely drawn up by Isaac Newton.
Good old Newtonian mechanics.
Exactly. The cosmos as a perfectly ordered, objective, deterministic clockwork. And it's worth noting that for Newton, this wasn't just a pragmatic mathematical framework.
No, not at all.
It was a profound ontological claim about reality. Newton viewed space and time as absolute.
Like a fixed stage.
Exactly. They were the unchanging stage upon which the play of the cosmos took place. He literally referred to absolute space as the sensorium of God.
That is such a crucial point. In that Newtonian paradigm, matter exists completely independently of our observation of it.
Right. The tree falling in the woods definitely makes a sound.
It definitely makes a sound, yes. It consists of solid, fundamental building blocks that move according to exact, invariable causal laws. The philosophical implication here is just absolute determinism.
And Blais's demon. Right.
Yeah, precisely. The French mathematician Laplace formalized this. It's the idea that if a super intellect knew the precise location and momentum of every single atom in the universe at this very moment,
and understood all the forces acting on it.
Right, then the entire future and the entire past would be completely transparent to it.
It's a universe where there are just no surprises, fundamentally.
None.
It's like an unfathomably complex game of cosmic billiards. The cue ball strikes the 8-ball, the kinetic energy transfers, the trajectory is locked in forever.
It's a binary, clean, mechanical system.
And that deeply intuitive, highly comforting view held absolute supreme authority until Albert Einstein arrived.
Yeah.
And he fundamentally rewired the architecture.
But he didn't just tweak Newton's math. He dismantled the absolute stage itself.
Right. Einstein demonstrated that space and time are not fixed absolute containers.
No, they are relative and dynamically intertwined into a single fabric space-time.
Space-time, yeah.
And gravity, in general relativity, is no longer seen as this mysterious invisible tether pulling objects together.
Like some spooky action.
Right. It is the actual geometric warping of space-time caused by mass and energy. And mass and energy themselves are proven to be interchangeable expressions of the same underlying reality, E equals mc squared.
Yet, for all the revolutionary warping and bending that Einstein introduced, there is a massive philosophical caveat here.
There really is.
Einstein completely overturned Newton's absolute space and time, but he remained a strict, unyielding structural realist.
He absolutely did. The bedrock of Einstein's worldview was the conviction that a physical reality exists independently of human observation.
He believed the universe possessed this deep, rational, objective harmony. Right.
Yes, and that mathematics was simply the language we use to uncover that pre-existing structure. He famously said, "I like to think the moon is there even if I am not looking at it."
Which is such a great quote.
Right.
But it brings us to the great friction of the 20th century. Because when quantum mechanics began to emerge in the 1920s, it started suggesting that at the subatomic level, the foundational layer of our physical wheeled things are not deterministic.
They are probabilistic.
They are fuzzy. And Einstein just hated this.
Hated it. This is the root of his famous declaration that God does not play dice.
Right. He engaged in these intense debates, particularly the EPR paradox with Podolsky and Rosen, trying to prove that quantum mechanics must be an incomplete theory.
He insisted there must be hidden variables we just couldn't see yet.
Because the alternative, a universe that doesn't have definite properties until you measure it, was just philosophically unacceptable to him.
Einstein was fighting for the survival of objective reality, but he was losing the fight against Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, and the whole Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics.
Yeah, Niels Bohr's insights effectively demolished classical realism.
Completely. Bohr argued that quantum entities like electrons, photons, the very stuff we are actually made of, they do not possess definite inherent properties prior to measurement.
Okay, we have to be very precise about the mechanism here, because this isn't just a limitation of human technology, right?
No, not at all.
Prior to Bohr, if an electron was spinning, we assumed it was like a tiny top spinning in the dark.
Yeah.
It had a definite spin and a definite location. We just needed a better flashlight to see it.
Exactly. But Bohr's radical claim was that the electron is not a tiny top spinning in the dark. The electron's physical reality, its position, its momentum, its spin, is literally undefined until it interacts with a macroscopic measuring device.
That is so hard to wrap your head around.
It is. Reality at the fundamental level is relational. Bohr formulated the principle of complementarity to explain this.
Oh, like with light.
Yes, take light. In certain experimental setups, light behaves unambiguously as a wave, creating these beautiful interference patterns.
Right.
But in other setups, it behaves unambiguously as discrete particles or photons hitting a detector like distinct physical bullets.
And in classical logic, something cannot be both a localized bullet and a spread-out wave. They're mutually exclusive concepts.
Exactly. But Bohr demonstrated that both descriptions are completely necessary to understand light. And crucially, you can never observe both behaviors simultaneously.
Right, so the nature of the reality you observe is fundamentally dictated by the question you ask it.
By the physical apparatus you choose to set up.
You cannot separate the objective system from the observer and their tools. The idea of a completely independent, pre-existing physical world was collapsing.
And then Werner Heisenberg pushes this epistemic crisis even further with the uncertainty principle.
Right. The math itself reveals a hard, built-in limit to what can exist simultaneously.
Heisenberg showed mathematically that certain pairs of physical properties, like position and momentum, are inversely related in terms of precision.
The more precisely you measure one, the less you know about the other.
Exactly. The more precisely you measure the position of a particle, the less precise its momentum becomes, and vice versa. Again, to your earlier point, this is not because our microscopes are clumsy and we accidentally bump the electron when we look at it.
It's not a user error.
No. The uncertainty is woven into the actual ontology of the universe.
Right, the wave function itself dictates this. A particle with a highly precise momentum is represented by a wave that is infinitely spread out across space.
Meaning it has no definite position.
Exactly. If you want a precise position, you have to add together waves of many different momenta. You create a localized wave packet, but you destroy any single definite momentum in the process. The universe simply refuses to allow an object to possess a full set of definite properties all at once.
Which led Heisenberg to a really fascinating philosophical conclusion.
Oh, about potentia.
Yes. He suggested that the quantum realm isn't composed of solid things at all. He resurrected Aristotle's old concept of potentia.
Possibilities.
Right. The subatomic world is a realm of possibilities or tendencies to exist. These abstract probabilities only collapse into actual, concrete, localized events through the act of measurement or interaction.
So ultimate reality, in Heisenberg's framework, shifts from being a collection of fixed objects to a dynamic, structured field of probabilities.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. Because if we try to visualize this, and I know visualizing quantum mechanics is a fool's errand, but let's try.
Let's do it.
If Newton's universe was a rigid, fixed photograph, right?
Yeah.
And Einstein's universe was a beautifully choreographed film printed on a flexible celluloid strip. Quantum mechanics suggests reality is more like a live improvisational dance. The particle exists in a state of pure potential. It's just a blur of possible movements.
I love that.
And the dance actually changes because the audience is watching it. It doesn't commit to a specific physical form until the measurement, forces it to.
The relationship between the observer and the observed is what actively generates the physical event in real time.
So wait, does this mean the universe is alive? Or just that our math is really weird at a microscopic level?
Well, the interactive relationship is the reality. And this isn't just a historical curiosity from the 1920s. Over the last 50 years, foundational physics has accelerated this trend.
Moving away from things.
Moving away from things and toward relations, information, and emergence. The physicist John Archibald Wheeler is a prime example. He coined the phrase, it from bit.
Right, meaning that every physical it, every particle, every field of force, even the fabric of space-time itself, derives its ultimate existence from bits, from binary yes or no answers to questions posed by a measuring apparatus.
Wheeler proposed a participatory universe. He argued that we are not merely passive spectators sitting behind a glass wall, just watching the universe happen.
We're part of it.
By observing, measuring, and extracting information, we are actively participating in the genesis of reality.
That is wild.
And Carlo Rovelli, a contemporary theoretical physicist, he pushes this to its absolute logical extreme with his framework of relational quantum mechanics.
Oh, I've read about this. It's intense.
It is. Rovelli argues that there is no absolute state of any system. Properties like velocity, position, or even existence are entirely relative to the system they are interacting with. There is no view from nowhere.
So we arrive at this point where the bedrock of materialism has completely dissolved. We have no solid objects, only webs of relationships.
Right.
We have no absolute properties, only fields of probability waiting for an interaction. If matter isn't fundamental, if it's just an emergent property of information and relationships, then what is doing the relating?
That is the question.
What is the medium of this information? We are staring directly at the hard problem of consciousness.
We are standing right at the edge of the quantum cliff. If the physical universe is deeply dependent on observation or measurement to collapse from probability into actuality, then the status of the observer becomes the most urgent question in science.
And this question completely split the greatest minds in physics into two deeply opposed camps, right?
Yes, a massive divide. The debate centers on whether consciousness is an emergent byproduct of the physical universe, or if consciousness is the fundamental ground from which the physical universe emerges.
Okay, let's examine the first camp, the emerging camp, because this probably represents the default view of modern scientific naturalism. This is where you find thinkers like Stephen Hawking or Sean Carroll.
Right. Hawking spent his life searching for a comprehensive theory of everything, something that could unite quantum mechanics and general relativity into a single, self-contained mathematical framework.
And in his no-boundary proposal for the origin of the universe, Hawking argued that the universe is completely self-contained.
Exactly. It has no boundaries in time and space, and therefore requires no outside creator, no initial cause, and certainly no underlying mystical consciousness to sustain it.
So the laws of physics, for Hawking, are just sufficient to explain everything from the Big Bang all the way to the human brain.
Yes. And Sean Carroll takes a very similar, highly sophisticated physicalist stance. In his framework of poetic naturalism, the fundamental layer of reality consists solely of quantum fields evolving according to impersonal, mathematically precise laws.
And in this framework, consciousness is just an epiphenomenon. It's a wildly complex, highly evolved, but ultimately incidental byproduct of physical processes.
Much like wetness.
Oh, the wetness analogy.
Yeah, wetness is an emergent property that appears when you combine enough water molecules at the right temperature. In the same way, consciousness is an emergent property that appears when you arrange enough neurons in a specific integrated biological network.
Right, so the foundational layer is just dead, unthinking math. And the feeling of being you is just what it feels like from the inside when that math gets incredibly complicated.
That's the emergent view in a nutshell.
But there is a glaring, persistent dissatisfaction with that explanation. I mean, explaining how neurons fire in complex patterns is what philosopher David Chalmers calls the easy problem of consciousness.
Even though it's incredibly hard biologically.
Sure, yeah. But the hard problem, the real issue, is explaining why all that physical processing actually feels like anything at all.
Why isn't it just operating in the dark?
Exactly. Why does the firing of a C fiber correlate with the subjective, undeniable agony of pain? Equations don't bleed.
No, they don't.
And this dissatisfaction drives the second camp. And what's wild is that this second camp isn't made of fringe pseudoscientists. It includes the very architects of modern physics: Max Planck, Erwin Schrödinger, and David Bohm.
Let's start with Max Planck, the physicist who literally discovered the quantum nature of energy, initiating this entire revolution.
Right?
Late in his life, looking back at the trajectory of his own discoveries, he made an unambiguous metaphysical declaration. He stated, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness."
Wow.
Planck concluded that we cannot get behind consciousness. Everything we talk about, everything we assume exists, postulates consciousness as a prerequisite.
The father of quantum theory concluding that mind precedes matter is a historical fact that often just gets completely glossed over in science textbooks.
It really does. But Erwin Schrödinger goes even further.
Schrödinger gave us wave mechanics. The Schrödinger equation is literally the beating heart of quantum mechanics. It describes how the quantum state of a physical system changes over time.
Right, but his philosophical writings reveal a man deeply immersed in mysticism, specifically Vedanta, the ancient Hindu philosophical tradition.
So he wasn't just like flirting with Eastern thought on the weekends.
No, he integrated it fully into his understanding of reality. He looked at the problem of multiple observers.
Right. If reality is a single interconnected quantum state, how do we account for the fact that billions of distinct human beings are experiencing it separately?
Exactly. And his answer was radical non-dualism. He argued that consciousness is a singular, unbroken whole. The apparent multiplicity of minds, the idea that you have your private consciousness and I have mine, is just a trick of biological formatting.
He famously wrote, "The total number of minds in the universe is one."
Yes.
The implications of that single sentence are staggering. It suggests that the sense of me talking right now and the sense of you listening are not fundamentally separate phenomena.
No, they aren't.
We are just two localized apertures, two different biological lenses, attached to the exact same cosmic camera. The universe is looking out at itself from billions of different angles, mistakenly believing each angle is an independent, isolated entity.
And if you want a rigorous scientific framework that actually supports Schrödinger's mystical intuition, you turn to David Bohm.
Bohm was brilliant. He was a protege of Einstein, wasn't he?
He was, and one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists of the 20th century. He developed an interpretation of quantum mechanics that completely bypasses the weirdness of wave function collapse by proposing an entirely new ontology.
There's the implicate and explicate order.
Yes, he introduced those concepts.
It's one of the most elegant conceptual models of reality I've ever encountered. Can you break down how the implicate order works?
Absolutely. Bohm argued that the fragmentation we perceive, the apparent fact that a tree is separate from the soil, that a star is separate from the telescope observing it, that you are separate from me, all of that is an illusion generated by our limited sensory apparatus and our language.
So it's a surface-level illusion.
Yes. This fragmented, visible world of separate objects moving through space and time is what he called the explicate order. It is the unfolded reality.
But the explicate order is just the surface.
Precisely. Beneath the explicate order, holding it all together, is the implicate order. This is a deeper, hidden, undivided wholeness.
A unified field.
Yes. It is a dynamic, continuous flowing movement that Bohm called the Hala movement. In the implicate order, everything is enfolded into everything else. Space and time do not exist as separating barriers.
Bohm famously used the analogy of a hologram to explain this unfoldment, which I think is absolutely brilliant.
It's the best way to picture it.
If you take a standard photograph of an apple, cut the photograph in half, and throw away one piece, you have lost half the visual information. You only have half an apple.
Right, classical physics.
But a hologram is created by interference patterns of laser light. If you take a holographic plate containing the image of an apple, shatter it, and pick up a tiny shard, you can shine a laser through that single tiny shard, and it will project the entire complete image of the apple.
The image will be slightly fuzzier, lower resolution, but the whole is implicitly contained within every single part.
Bohm was arguing that the universe itself is structured like a hologram.
Yes. The totality of existence is enfolded within every specific region of space and time. When a particle seems to appear here and then disappear there, it's not actually traveling across empty space.
It's unfolding and unfolding.
Exactly. It is unfolding from the implicate order into the explicate order and then unfolding back into it, only to unfold somewhere else. The underlying reality is an unbroken, unified field of information and consciousness.
So if we trace this journey, physics has systematically dismantled its own foundation.
It really has.
We started with Newton's solid machine. We drilled down into the atoms, mapped the quantum fields, and found that matter isn't solid. We found that separateness is a geometric illusion, that information and relation are primary, and that the observer is inextricably woven into the fabric of the observed.
Physics has brilliantly mathematically proven that reality is an unfathomable, interconnected mystery.
But this leads to a profound methodological crisis. Because if physics has brought us to the edge of the cliff, how do we actually cross the chasm?
Well, according to the contemplative traditions and the modern mystics, physicists are standing at the edge of the canyon trying to build a bridge using a tape measure and a calculator.
They're using the wrong cognitive tools.
Exactly. They're using the wrong tools for the job.
Which brings us to the mystics' critique. This is where we shift from the epistemology of mapping reality to the phenomenology of directly experiencing it. Physics has hit a dead end because it remains trapped in conceptual knowledge.
The critique from the contemplative traditions is razor sharp. Think about the operational basis of science. It relies on measurement, on mathematics, on conceptual modeling, and above all, on the fundamental assumption that there is an independent observer studying an external system.
Right, even quantum mechanics. Even though it acknowledges that the observer alters the system, it still mathematically formulates the situation as an interaction between two distinct entities, the measurement apparatus and the quantum state.
You are always standing outside the thing, looking at the thing.
Always.
And the mystics argued that studying the architecture of reality through concepts and mathematical abstractions is identical to drawing a highly accurate map of a dream while you are still sleeping.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You can figure out the precise gravitational constant of the dream world. You can map the chemical composition of the dream objects. You can win a Nobel Prize in dream physics.
But you are still asleep.
You are still asleep. True realization of ultimate reality doesn't come from refining the map. It comes from waking up from the dreamer.
Let's ground this in a specific analogy, because this distinction between conceptual knowledge and direct experience is the hardest thing to grasp.
It really is, yeah.
Imagine a wake moving across the surface of the ocean. A team of physicists comes along in a boat, and they are absolutely obsessed with measuring this wake. They measure the kinetic energy, the height of the crests, the geometric angle of the troughs, the chemical composition of the sea foam.
Right.
They produce a flawless, mathematically perfect model of the wake.
Their predictive power is absolute. They know exactly what the wake will do next.
But then a contemplative mystic stands on the shoreline and yells out to the physicists, "You are missing the entire underlying reality. Stop measuring the wake and realize that you are the ocean itself."
The wake is just the ocean temporarily experiencing itself in a localized moving form.
Yes. The distinct, separate entity called a wake doesn't actually exist independent of the ocean. It is an illusion of form. You cannot understand the true nature of the ocean by cataloging the geometry of the temporary forms it takes. To understand the ocean, you have to realize that you are the water.
That analogy perfectly isolates the epistemic barrier. The physicist is trapped in dualistic analysis, measuring a reality that appears separate from them.
Right.
The mystic recognizes that the final barrier to ultimate truth isn't a missing mathematical equation. It is the egoic standpoint itself, the subject-object split.
Because any conceptualization automatically creates a duality.
Yeah.
A subject who is thinking and an object that is being thought about.
Precisely. The intellect can only carve reality into pieces. It cannot grasp the unbroken whole.
It can't.
That is exactly the point the mystic makes. Intellect and language approach the mystery asymptotically. You can draw closer and closer, your models can get more and more refined, but you will never touch the absolute through thought.
Because thought is always just another form in the ocean.
Exactly. The mystic insists that the observer system split must completely collapse. Direct, unmediated experience of pure awareness is required. Knowing about unity as a physical theory is entirely different from directly experiencing oneself as the non-dual ground of reality.
Which brings us to a contemporary figure who bridges this gap perfectly. Someone who takes the theories of Bohm and Schrödinger and subjects them to direct, lived, experiential verification. Joe Bandra.
Bandra is fascinating.
We have his extensive writings, including Finding Nava and Body, Mind, and Machine. For over 50 years, Bandra has been exploring the frontiers where quantum mechanics, depth psychology, and consciousness intersect.
And his journey hasn't been a detached academic exercise. It has been a profound internal exploration.
Right. Bandra represents the modern synthesis. After decades of deep contemplative practice and mystical experiences, his core realizations align perfectly with the theoretical conclusions of quantum physics.
It derived entirely from the inside out.
Exactly. He realized, not as a hypothesis, but as a visceral fact of consciousness, that what our physical senses perceive as separate, isolated objects is a construct. The fragmentation of life is an illusion generated by the restrictive bandwidth of human perception.
He outlines a worldview that beautifully integrates the visible and the invisible. He writes that the invisible is continuously manifesting as the visible.
The formless is constantly pouring itself into form.
Yes. The infinite expresses itself as the finite. What we casually call dead matter isn't inert substance at all. It is a dynamic, localized expression arising from a much deeper unified field of intelligence.
And he explicitly addresses the hard problem of consciousness.
He does.
For Bandra, consciousness is unequivocally not an accident of biology. It is not an emergent property of the brain.
Consciousness is the fundamental quantum information field itself.
It is the primordial ground of all being. Space, time, matter, energy, biological life. All of it emerges from and is sustained by this underlying field of pure awareness.
But the most striking element of Bandra's work is his explanation of why this is happening.
Yes, the why is the biggest question.
The universe isn't just a static pool of consciousness. Reality is an active, living process. It is universal consciousness choosing to experience itself through countless localized, finite points of view.
And we are those points of view.
We are. The individual self, the you, with a name, a history, a body, is real on a relative level. It functions perfectly well within Bohm's explicate order.
Right, you still have to pay your bills.
Exactly. But ultimately, that individual self is completely inseparable from the underlying whole. Bandra encapsulates this brilliantly when he says, the all-knowing appears as limited knowledge moving through evolving forms.
Okay, here is where I genuinely struggle, and I think anyone listening might hit the same wall.
Let's hear it.
If the universe is fundamentally a perfect, infinite, unbroken, all-knowing ocean of pure consciousness, why would it voluntarily shatter itself into billions of anxious, fragmented drops?
It's the ultimate question.
Right, like why create humans who have to endure physical pain, existential dread, paying taxes, experiencing grief and heartbreak? If you are a perfect, peaceful ocean, what is the point of playing this bizarre, painful, agonizing game of hide-and-seek with yourself?
Why not just remain in a state of formless perfection?
Exactly. Why do any of this?
That is the most profound objection you can raise. It is the core of the problem of suffering, reframed through a non-dual lens. Why does the one become the many if the many guarantees suffering?
And Bandra provides an experiential answer to this.
He does. He realized that a completely uniform, infinite awareness has no contrast. It has no way to dynamically know itself.
It's just one solid color.
Right. It can be itself, but it cannot experience itself without creating a reflection. To experience anything, you need a subject and an object.
You need two things.
So the one must pretend to be two. It must limit itself, forget its own infinity, and take on the constraints of time, space, and finite form, precisely so it can experience the thrill of discovery, the process of evolution, and the eventual joy of waking up to its own true nature.
It's the concept of Leela from Hinduism, right? The divine play.
Yes.
The universe is playing a game with itself. It's deliberately getting lost in the maze of creation just for the experience of finding its way out.
Yes, and what's remarkable is that Bandra is not an isolated voice crying in the wilderness here.
Not at all.
This specific experiential realization that the self is an illusion, that consciousness is fundamental, and that the universe is experiencing itself through us, it echoes across millennia, uniting incredibly disparate cultures, eras, and disciplines.
It is the core of what Aldous Huxley famously called the perennial philosophy.
Let's trace these echoes across time because the historical alignment is just staggering.
We can start in ancient China, roughly 2,500 years ago, with Laozi and the Tao Te Ching. Laozi's fundamental teaching points directly to a formless source behind all manifestation.
The Tao.
Right. He talks about the Tao as the nameless origin of heaven and earth. He describes reality as a process where stillness manifests as movement, and the ultimate wisdom is returning to that stillness. It maps perfectly onto Bandra's concept of the invisible manifesting as the visible.
It really does. And then you cross over to India to the 8th century and look at Adi Shankara, the great consolidator of Advaita Vedanta.
Advaita, meaning non-dual.
Exactly. The term Advaita literally means not two. Shankara's central revolutionary teaching can be summarized in 3 words. Atman is Brahman.
That's powerful.
He taught that the deepest, most fundamental spark of subjective awareness within you, the Atman, is not merely connected to God. It is literally exactly the same substance as Brahman, the ultimate, infinite reality of the universe.
He argued that the entire world of apparent separation and multiplicity is Maya, an illusion born of ignorance.
Which is exactly the philosophy Erwin Schrödinger was reading when he concluded that there is only one mind in the universe.
The cross-pollination between ancient mysticism and quantum physics is just right there in plain sight.
It's undeniable.
Moving forward in time, we hit the 13th century in the Middle East with Jalal al-Din Rumi, the legendary Sufi mystic and poet. Now, Rumi didn't write philosophical treatises, he wrote ecstatic poetry. But the underlying mechanics of his worldview are identical.
He viewed all of existence as the divine unfolding and expressing itself through countless distinct forms.
Right, and Rumi articulated the holographic principle 7 centuries before David Bohm even thought of it.
Oh, yes.
There is a famous line attributed to him that ties back perfectly to the ocean analogy we made earlier. He wrote, "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop."
That is just so beautiful. The totality of the whole is fully present within the localized part. The separation between the drop and the ocean is merely an illusion of boundaries.
We also have to look at Nagarjuna, the 2nd century Buddhist philosopher who founded the Madhyamaka school. His central doctrine was shunyata, usually translated as emptiness.
But Nagarjuna didn't mean a bleak nihilistic void.
Right, no. He meant that all things are empty of intrinsic independent existence. Nothing exists on its own. Everything arises interdependently, conditioned by everything else.
The parallels between Nagarjuna's emptiness and Carlo Rovelli's relational quantum mechanics are absolutely uncanny. Both argue that entities possess no absolute properties, only properties relative to other entities. Reality is a dynamic web of relations devoid of solid, independent substance.
And to bring it into the 20th century, we have figures like Ramana Maharshi in India. He didn't ask people to adopt a complex belief system. His entire method was a relentless experiential inquiry into the question, who am I?
Such a simple but devastating question.
He instructed people to trace the feeling of I back to its source, bypassing the thoughts, the body, and the memories to discover the silent, pure, non-dual awareness that exists prior to the ego. The goal was to collapse the subject-object split through direct experience.
So we have the mystics and the quantum physicists perfectly aligned, but what about the philosophers?
Right, because Western philosophy has tackled this exact terrain too.
Yes, particularly your question about why the universe engages in this complex game of hide and seek. The 19th century German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel provides perhaps the most robust, rational framework for this exact process.
Hegel is notoriously dense, but his core idea of the absolute spirit seems to directly answer the question of why the one becomes the many. Let's unpack how Hegel views reality.
Well, Hegel completely rejected the idea that reality is static. For Hegel, reality is a dynamic, historical, unfolding process. He posited that the ultimate reality is absolute spirit or Geist. But crucially, in its original unmanifest state, this absolute spirit is infinite, but it is effectively unconscious. It lacks self-reflective awareness. It simply is.
Oh, so it's like the ocean before it has eyes to see itself.
Exactly. To achieve true self-consciousness, Hegel argued, the absolute must undergo a process of alienation.
It has to externalize itself.
It has to manifest as the physical universe, as biology, as human history, and as individual conscious minds. It creates the other, the finite world of limitation, struggle, and suffering, precisely so it can have something to interact with.
Wow.
Through the messy dialectical evolution of human history, art, religion, and philosophy, the universe is slowly, painfully waking up to its own nature.
So under Hegel's framework, the universe makes us so it can look at itself.
Yes.
The struggle, the history, the fact that we have to go through pain and anxiety, it's not a cosmic mistake or a meaningless accident. It is the necessary logical mechanism by which the infinite achieves self-consciousness. We are the universe's sensory organs.
Hegel provides the philosophical rationale for Bandra's experiential realization. And he wasn't alone. Baruch Spinoza, in the 17th century, argued for a deeply interconnected reality, too.
Spinoza claimed there is only one infinite substance, which he called God or nature.
Right. He argued that mind and matter are not two separate things, as Descartes claimed, but simply two different attributes of the exact same underlying substance.
And Arthur Schopenhauer later argued that the diverse world of phenomena we perceive is just a surface appearance, rooted in a deeper, underlying, unified reality he called will.
But the history of Western philosophy isn't just a unified march toward mystical non-dualism. There are massive, formidable skeptics in the tradition who throw up a massive epistemic wall.
Oh, definitely. The biggest one being Immanuel Kant.
Kant's critique of pure reason is the great roadblock for any mystical claim. Kant argued brilliantly that human beings can never ever know reality in itself, what he called the noumenal world.
Because our minds are equipped with built-in perceptual and cognitive software, right? Space, time, and causality.
Exactly. Everything we experience is filtered through this software. We only ever know the phenomenal world, the world as it appears to us.
It's like we are born wearing unremovable, rose-tinted virtual reality goggles.
That's a great metaphor.
We can describe the VR environment perfectly, but we can never take the goggles off to see the actual server running the simulation.
Exactly. So Kant would look at Joe Bandra or Rumi or Shankara, and he would say, I respect that you had a profound, world-shattering experience of unity. But you are still a human being. Your brain is still processing that experience.
You can't escape your biology.
Right. He'd say you cannot guarantee that your experience of ultimate reality is actually the metaphysical truth of the universe, rather than just an extraordinary, anomalous operating state of your human cognitive software.
That is a tough argument to beat. And then Ludwig Wittgenstein comes along in the 20th century and attacks the problem from the angle of language.
Yes. He concludes his Tractatus with the famous line, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must remain silent.
Wittgenstein argued that the structure of language is fundamentally designed to describe facts and logical relations in the empirical world. When you try to use language to describe the ultimate, undiluted ground of being, language completely breaks down.
It produces nonsense. He wasn't denying that the mystical exists. In fact, he deeply respected it, but he believed that any attempt to articulate it conceptually instantly distorts it. The truth of unity can be shown, but it cannot be said.
Which makes perfect sense when you consider the nature of what we're talking about. I mean, describing non-duality with a language built on subjects and verbs is like trying to explain the color red to someone who has been blind from birth using only a piano.
The tools are structurally incompatible with the reality.
Right. But Kant's challenge is the most pressing one. Are these mystical experiences actually revealing the fabric of the universe, or are they just a psychological glitch?
That is the big question.
If separateness is an illusion, if we are all one cosmic mind pretending to be individuals, how does the human brain cope with encountering that truth without fracturing? To answer that, we really have to look at how modern psychology interprets this phenomenon.
And the great psychologists of the 19th and 20th centuries grappled extensively with mystical experiences. They reached very different conclusions based on their respective frameworks.
If we look at Carl Jung, we find a psychological model that is incredibly sympathetic to the mystic and the quantum physicist.
Jung's concept of the collective unconscious seems to map beautifully onto Bohm's implicate order.
It really does. Jung completely rejected the idea that the psyche is a purely personal, isolated phenomenon contained within the skull.
Right. He believed the human mind is rooted in a vast, shared transpersonal domain, the collective unconscious, populated by archetypes.
So Jung would interpret an experience of oceanic unity not as a hallucination, but as a genuine encounter with what he called the self, capital S.
For Jung, the ego is just a small, floating island of conscious awareness resting on a massive, hidden ocean of collective psychic reality. He believed the psyche itself is part of the deeper, unified architecture of nature.
And William James, the pioneer of American psychology, approached this from a more empirical, pragmatic angle in his masterpiece, The Varieties of Religious Experience.
He didn't necessarily try to prove the metaphysics, but he intensely studied the phenomenology.
James collected and analyzed hundreds of accounts of mystical states, and he made a crucial observation. These experiences possess a profound self-evident authority for the person having them.
They feel, in his exact words, more real than ordinary reality.
Furthermore, James noted that these states are overwhelmingly characterized by a sense of ineffability, a deep sense of unity, and a radical transcendence of time and space. He concluded that regardless of their ultimate metaphysical origin, these experiences are a valid, profoundly transformative dimension of human potential that psychology just has to take seriously.
And that idea of human potential is exactly where Abraham Maslow picked up the baton in the mid-20th century.
Everyone knows Maslow for the hierarchy of needs, culminating in self-actualization. But later in his career, he realized self-actualization wasn't the top of the pyramid.
Right. Maslow began studying what he termed peak experiences. He found that the healthiest, most highly functioning, most creative individuals frequently reported spontaneous mystical experiences.
Moments of profound unity, ego dissolution, and deep interconnectedness with the cosmos.
Maslow argued that these experiences of self-transcendence represent the absolute height of psychological health and human evolution. He vehemently opposed the psychiatric tendency to pathologize mystical states.
And Stanislav Grof took this right into clinical practice. Through decades of research, initially using psychedelics and later breathwork, Grof mapped out what he called the transpersonal realms of the psyche.
He documented thousands of clinical sessions where individuals reported vivid, verifiable experiences of ego death, cosmic unity, and identification with the entire universe.
Grof concluded, based purely on clinical data, that consciousness truly does extend beyond the boundaries of the physical brain.
Right.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic again. We have Jung, James, Maslow, and Grof, all validating the profound, unifying nature of these experiences. But there's a massive shadow looming over this psychological consensus.
And his name is Sigmund Freud.
Yes. If Freud were sitting here listening to us talk about the universe as a unified field of consciousness, he would puff his cigar, shake his head, and offer a devastatingly cynical counterargument.
Let's hear the Freudian diagnosis.
Freud would say, look at the human condition. You were born into a vast, cold, impersonal, mechanically indifferent universe. You are a fragile biological organism uniquely cursed with the knowledge of your own inevitable death.
A very cheerful worldview.
Right. The existential terror of that isolation is unbearable for the human ego.
Yeah.
So what do? You invent a fantasy. This oceanic feeling of total interconnectedness, this idea that you are actually the universe itself, is nothing but a massive psychological defense mechanism.
It is pure wish fulfillment, he'd say.
Exactly. You are terrified of being a separate adult in a dangerous world, so your psyche regresses. It creates a hallucination of unity to simulate the total safety and boundaryless comfort you felt in your mother's womb. Freud essentially claimed that mysticism is infantile regression.
It is the most potent, articulate critique of mysticism in modern psychology. Freud actually debated this specific point in correspondence with the writer Romain Rolland, who had challenged Freud to explain the oceanic feeling that drives all religious and mystical sentiment.
And Freud acknowledged the feeling exists, but as you said, he completely dismissed its ontological validity. He reduced the mystical experience to neurosis, a retreat from the harsh reality of the reality principle.
So how do we reconcile that? Is Joe Bandra experiencing the ultimate truth of a quantum universe? Or is he just terrified of the void and regressing to a womb state?
The resolution requires looking at the trajectory of the individual after the experience.
Right, the aftermath.
Regression, by definition, makes a person less capable, more dependent, and less engaged with reality. But the overwhelming data collected by James, Maslow, and Grof shows the exact opposite.
Individuals who undergo genuine transpersonal experiences of unity do not retreat from life.
They integrate the experience and return to the world with deeply enhanced empathy, decreased fear of death, greater creativity, and a profound sense of purpose. They become more psychologically robust, not less. As Maslow pointed out, this is the hallmark of evolution, not pathology.
And when you zoom out and look at the grand convergence of all these different fields, the Freudian critique starts to look incredibly narrow.
It really does.
That is the ultimate takeaway here. You have foundational quantum mechanics demonstrating the dissolution of solid matter, the primacy of relationships, and the unavoidable presence of the observer.
You have millennia of human philosophical inquiry, from Advaita Vedanta to Hegel, pointing toward a unified ground of being waking up to itself.
And you have transpersonal psychology documenting the profoundly healing, integrating effects of these unitive experiences. When physics, ancient philosophy, and modern psychology all point to the exact same center of the maze, it strongly suggests that the oceanic feeling is not a hallucination of the womb. It is an apprehension of reality itself.
We have covered a staggering amount of intellectual terrain today. Let's try to synthesize the journey we just took.
It's been a long road.
We started in the comforting, predictable clockwork of Newton's universe, where everything is solid, separate, and strictly determined. Then we watched Einstein bend the stage, only for Bohr and Heisenberg to completely dissolve the actors on it.
They revealed a quantum reality that is relational, probabilistic, and deeply dependent on the observer.
We followed that thread to its logical conclusion with Schrödinger and Bohm, who provided the scientific intuition for a universe that is an undivided holographic whole. A universe where the multiplicity of minds is an illusion, and the underlying reality is a single, unfolding consciousness.
We then confronted the epistemic limit of science. The mystic's critique that you cannot understand the ocean by measuring the geometry of the wake.
We explored Joe Bondra's direct, experiential claim that the universe is a living process, deliberately limiting itself into finite forms in order to experience its own existence.
And we saw how that radical insight resonates through the teachings of Lavoisier, Shankara, and Rumi, finds rational justification in Hegel's absolute spirit, and survives the psychological scrutiny of Jung and Maslow.
It all converges on a single, inescapable paradigm shift. The rigid boundary between the observer and the observed is a useful fiction.
The universe is not a collection of dead objects interacting in empty space. It is a single, dynamic, living process.
And human consciousness is not a meaningless byproduct of that process.
Right.
It is the very mechanism through which the universe knows itself.
And this brings us to the final, most important implication of everything we've discussed. This isn't just an intellectual exercise to entertain you on your commute. We aren't just summarizing abstract physics or debating ancient history.
No, if Bandra is right, if Schrödinger is right, if Rumi is right, then the ultimate fundamental reality of the cosmos isn't out there.
It's not hiding in the distant background radiation waiting for a better telescope.
It's not locked inside a subatomic particle waiting to be smashed open in a supercollider. The ultimate reality is the very awareness that is listening to these words right now.
The ocean isn't out there. You are the water. The search for meaning external to yourself is fundamentally flawed because the seeker is what is being sought.
So I want to leave you with a provocation today, an experiment. The next time you walk past a mirror, or the next time you catch a reflection in a dark window, I want you to stop for a moment. Look yourself directly in the eyes, and seriously ask yourself, who is the one actually looking? Are you really just a fragile, isolated collection of atoms, a temporary biological accident staring at a piece of glass? Or are you the entire infinite universe, slowly waking up from a multi-billion-year dream and finally peering back at itself?